Ashford, Vermont. A town so quiet, so picture-perfect, you'd think tragedy was something that happened somewhere else. Nestled between rolling green hills in summer and snow-draped forests in winter, it was the kind of place where neighbors waved from their porches, where kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on, and where people still left their doors unlocked. And for years, Daniel and Grace Whitmore were the living proof that fairy tales could happen here. He was the steady one, a mechanical engineer who clocked in at 9, clocked out at 5, came home, ate dinner with his wife, read scripture before bed. Tall, clean-cut, polite. Not the kind of man to waste words, but when he did speak, you listened. Grace was the opposite, light where Daniel was shadow. A preschool teacher with a laugh that could make toddlers stop crying and grown men soften. She wore her blonde hair in loose waves and always smelled faintly of lavender and fresh laundry. She baked cookies for the fire department. She knew every dog's name in town. When they walked hand in hand to Sunday service, they looked like they had stepped straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. 6 years of marriage. No drama. No scandal. Just clean living, faith, and a white picket fence. They lived in a modest 2-story colonial on Pine Street, painted soft white with navy shutters. In the upstairs hallway, there was a spare room, the baby's room, they called it, though it had been collecting dust for years. Because there was one thing missing. One thing they'd prayed for, dreamed about, and failed to hold on to, a child. Grace tried everything, charting her ovulation down to the hour, switching diets, acupuncture, prayer circles. Month after month, the tests came back negative. She never cried in front of Daniel. She didn't have to. He saw it in the way she lingered over baby's shoes in the store, in the way her smile faltered when someone brought a newborn to church. Daniel never blamed her, never raised his voice, never even looked disappointed. But something hardened in him. Quiet, cold, like winter creeping in through a cracked window. And then, on an ordinary autumn evening, everything changed. Grace sat on the edge of their clawfoot tub, her hands trembling as she stared at 2 bold pink lines on the test strip. Pregnant. When she told Daniel, he didn't shout. He didn't laugh or cry. But when his hand touched her stomach, it shook. Thank God, he whispered. The news spread through Ashford in less than 48 hours. The church held a special prayer for the Whitmores. Grace's students made a giant card filled with crayon hearts and backward letters. It felt like a miracle, like something had finally shifted in their favor. But something in Daniel shifted, too. Slowly at first. He became more watchful, more precise. He insisted on attending every prenatal appointment. He suggested they switch to a hospital 40 miles away, St. Mary's, claiming they had better doctors. But when Grace looked into his eyes, what she saw didn't feel like excitement. It felt like suspicion. And the truth? That suspicion would one day lead to blood on white hospital sheets, a town divided, and a story the world would never forget. Because in less than a year, Ashford, Vermont would go from a postcard-perfect paradise to the site of one of the most shocking crimes in modern memory. From the street, the Whitmore house looked like a promise. Fresh paint, trim hedges, a porch swing that creaked in summer and sang in winter winds. But upstairs, second door on the right, sat a room that told the truth no one said out loud. The baby's room. Grace had named it that even before there was a whisper of a heartbeat. Soft yellow walls, a mobile of paper stars, a thrifted rocking chair she'd sanded and painted herself. On the shelf, 3 picture books, their spines still stiff. In the corner, a small wicker basket with 1 pair of impossibly tiny socks folded and waiting and gathering dust. Maybe next month, she'd murmur, half prayer, half ritual, straightening the paper stars so they wouldn't tangle. Please, God, maybe next month. Infertility is a quiet grief. There's no funeral, no casseroles, just a drawer full of test strips and a calendar that cuts you 12 times a year. Grace learned the language of hope and bracing in the same breath. Inhale on day 26, don't look on 27, don't crumble on 28. Oh, the way her knees would tremble on 29. She tried everything. She charted temperatures with a precision that would shame a meteorologist. She downloaded apps, deleted them, downloaded new ones with brighter icons and bolder promises. She switched to a fertility diet, turmeric smoothies, leafy greens, and not a single drop of coffee. Acupuncture on Thursdays, needles like tiny flags declaring her body a battlefield worth fighting for. She joined a prayer circle at church, the kind where women whispered names and needs over clasped hands and trembling chins. God hears, Pastor Everett Cole would say from the pulpit, voice warm as a blanket. Not on our timeline, but he hears. Amen. And amen again. But each month, the test window stayed blank or bloomed a single, lonely pink line. One line that might as well have been a verdict. Grace never cried in front of Daniel. She didn't have to. He saw it anyway. The way she paused at the end cap of baby clothes in the supermarket, touching a knit hat with two little ears. The way she lingered at nursery windows at the hospital when they visited friends, smiling too hard, blinking too fast. He saw her in church when someone passed a newborn down the pew. How her smile reached her lips, but not her eyes. He never blamed her. He never raised his voice. In fact, he never said much at all. Next month, he would say, kissing the crown of her head, his hand gentle and careful, like she might shatter. We'll keep trying. But silence can be a kind of weather. It can settle. It can freeze. Something in Daniel cooled. Not cruelty, not contempt, just winter. He became punctual the way a clock is punctual. He kept the books balanced, the car serviced, the lawn neat as a Marine's haircut. He studied scripture at night, the lamplight painting a gold circle on the page while Grace lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, counting miracles that weren't coming. Do you think God is waiting for something? She asked once, voice barely above a whisper. Daniel closed the Bible and looked at her. He's waiting for us to be faithful, he said. We keep the house. We keep our vows. We keep our hearts clean. He does the rest. Oh, if only faith worked like a vending machine. The longer the room stayed empty, the louder the town's kindness sounded. You two would make such wonderful parents, Mrs. Dalton said at the church picnic, spooning potato salad onto Grace's plate like generosity could fill a womb. Any news? Asked a neighbor with a smile so soft it felt like a bruise. Even the mailman, bless him, started leaving coupons for baby stores in their mailbox, as if he, too, were trying to nudge heaven along. Grace kept busy. She taught 4-year-olds how to line up without stepping on each other's shadows. She learned every parent's name, every child's fear. She spent Saturdays baking cookies for the fire department, the kitchen warm and sweet and loud enough to drown out the ache. She planted a row of sunflowers by the fence and pretended they're tall. Stubborn faces were a promise of something tall and stubborn inside her, too. At night, she wrote in a spiral notebook she kept under the mattress. Not poetry, just plain, unadorned truth. Day 142. I smiled at church, but my voice shook when I sang. God must know the difference between singing and shaking. Day 189. Bought a onesie on sale. I hid it in the dryer so I wouldn't see it. Day 223. I think Daniel's tired of waiting, but he won't say it. I can feel it in the way he folds his shirts. Perfect, then more perfect, like control could fix us. Then came the doctors. Tests upon tests. Blood work with names that sounded like passwords. EMH, FSH, TSH. The answers trickled in, unexplained. How infuriating. How cruel. Not know, just we don't know, which can be worse because hope keeps standing up when it should sit down and rest. Meanwhile, the town did what small towns do. They watched. They weren't unkind, not really. But their gaze felt like a mirror Grace hadn't asked to look into. At the grocery store, someone would ask about her class, then her garden, then, almost casually, any little ones of your own yet? Smile. Joke. Deflect. Go home. Cry into a towel so Daniel wouldn't hear. He heard anyway. He always did. Let's repaint the spare room, he said one Sunday, as if a fresh coat could change the future. Blue this time. Yellow is neutral, Grace replied, too quickly. Yellow means we're ready for whoever comes. Then we'll keep it yellow, he said, and that was that. They pressed on. Ovulation tests on the bathroom counter, dates circled in ink, calendars synced, intimacy scheduled like a dentist appointment. It became a choreography of urgency, now or never, tonight or wait another month. Tenderness turned to timetables. Desire became duty. And in the quiet that came after, Grace would lie awake and stare at the star's mobile, which she had hung from the hallway to air out the paper smell. She let it turn slowly in the draft and imagine breath lifting it. Imagine life. Oh, the contortions hope can do. Then, a sliver of mercy, or was it mischief, flickered through an ordinary day. Grace was late. Not by much. just enough to wake that reckless little voice inside her. What if? She didn't test. Not yet. She waited one day, then two, bargaining with the universe. If the red bud tree blooms this week, if the radio plays our wedding song, if the sunflowers survive the cold snap. Silly, beautiful, human. On day 5, she bought a test. She hid it under a bag of flour in the pantry, as if shame were heavy and could keep anything down. That night, she and Daniel ate dinner in the gentle rhythm they'd built. He asked about her students. She asked about a machine at the plant that kept misbehaving. He washed, she dried. They moved like a pair of hands that had been clasped for a long time and knew each other's shape. When he went upstairs to shower, Grace stayed behind, fingers white on the countertop. Not yet, she told herself. In the morning, when the light is kind. Morning came, pale and quiet. She took the test. She didn't watch the window. She couldn't. She set it face down on the edge of the tub, pressed her palms into her knees, and counted. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 30, 60. She flipped it over. 1 line. Empty. Again. Oh, come on. The exclamation burst out of her before she could swallow it. Please, just once. She covered her mouth with her hand, as if she could pull the word back. Tears flooded and then receded, stubborn as the tide. She wiped her face, practiced the smile she would wear downstairs, and tucked the test deep into the trash beneath a nest of tissues. Daniel found her in the doorway, a towel around his neck, hair dripping. He saw the way her shoulders were set, like she was bracing for a wave. Next month, he said softly. She nodded. Next month. They held each other in the kitchen with the sun still low and the coffee still cold, and for a moment their bodies said everything their mouths couldn't. I'm here. I'm trying. I'm not enough. I'm still here. Weeks turned to months. The room upstairs became a museum of almosts. And yet, somehow, despite the wait, life kept nudging forward. Grace laughed with a student who insisted the moon followed her bus. She planted bulbs along the path and imagined how they'd look in spring. She turned the mobile now and then, just to hear the faint whisper of paper brushing air. Then, on a crisp autumn evening, life did the unthinkable. 2 bold pink lines. Clear as sunrise. Grace's breath punched out of her, a sob disguised as a laugh. Oh my God, oh my God. She sat on the edge of the tub, the world blurring and sharpening at the same time. She pressed her palm to her belly even though there was nothing to feel yet, and whispered, Please stay. When she told Daniel, his hand trembled on her skin, and for the first time in months something warm cracked through his winter. Thank God, he breathed. The town rejoiced. The prayer circle turned their whispers into hallelujahs. The porch swing carried the secret in its soft creak. And upstairs, the baby's room, yellow and patient, felt, at last, like a promise that might not break. If only promises were that simple. If only joy arrived without a shadow. Because even as Ashford celebrated, something in Daniel shifted, small at first, then steady, like a compass that had quietly, decisively turned. At first, it really did feel like a miracle. The kind of blessing you whisper about in case speaking too loud might scare it away. Grace floated through those first few weeks of pregnancy in a kind of stunned joy. She tucked her prenatal vitamins beside the sugar jar so she wouldn't forget. She downloaded a baby development app and checked it twice a day, marveling that her child was now the size of a blueberry, then the size of a plum. She hummed lullabies without even realizing it. Ashford caught the news quickly. News always traveled faster than weather in this town. Mrs. Dalton from church brought over a casserole for your strength. The ladies from the prayer circle hugged her extra long on Sundays. Her students made a giant card with crooked hearts, mismatched colors, and one big message scrawled across the front. We love you, Mrs. Whitmore. Daniel smiled through it all. He shook hands, nodded at congratulations, let people clap him on the back. But when the crowd was gone, when the front door was locked and the curtains were drawn, there was something different in his eyes. He watched Grace more closely now, subtly at first, then with a precision that made her skin prickle. He wanted to be at every appointment. He asked detailed questions about her diet. He started keeping a notepad in the kitchen where he wrote down what she ate and when. At first, she found it sweet, caring, protective. Then, one night, over dinner, he said, I've been thinking, maybe we should switch hospitals. Go to St. Mary's instead of Ashford General. Grace looked up from her plate. That's 40 miles away. They've got better doctors, he said, almost too quickly. Better facilities. She studied him for a moment. His jaw was tight, his eyes steady in a way that felt less like excitement and more like something else. Daniel, is something wrong with Ashford General? No, he said, but it wasn't a no that ended a conversation. It was a no that built a wall. So they switched hospitals. St. Mary's, 40 miles away. The first time they made the drive, the road curved through thick woods and quiet farmland. Grace tried to make light conversation, pointing out a family of deer grazing at the tree line. Daniel nodded but didn't smile. His hands gripped the steering wheel like he was guiding something through a storm only he could see. At the appointments, he never left her side. He listened to the doctor with the intensity of a man taking notes for an exam. He asked about tests, blood work, ultrasounds. Once, when the doctor stepped out, Grace tried to joke, "You're more thorough than the OB." Daniel didn't laugh. "Just making sure everything's right," he said. She wanted to believe that was all it was. Just a husband excited to meet his child. Just a man being careful. But at night, she'd wake up to find him lying on his back, staring at the ceiling, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Sometimes she'd whisper, "What are you thinking about?" And every time, he'd answer, "The future." One evening, as she folded tiny onesies in the nursery, Grace realized she hadn't been humming lately. Her joy, so bright just weeks ago, had dulled, replaced by something she didn't want to name. She blamed hormones, the stress of pregnancy, the endless list of things to buy and prepare. But deep down, in the quiet place where honesty lives, she knew it was more than that. She remembered the way his hand had trembled when she told him the news. She'd thought it was joy. Now she wasn't sure. And sometimes, when she caught him looking at her, it didn't feel like he was seeing her. It felt like he was measuring her. Waiting. Grace told herself she was imagining it. She told herself love could not coexist with suspicion. She told herself nothing in the world could ruin the miracle growing inside her. But even miracles cast shadows. And soon, that shadow would stretch all the way into a delivery room, where joy would end, and something far darker would take its place. Grace Whitmore had never cheated before, never even thought about it. For 6 years, she'd built her life around Daniel, his quiet steadiness, his devotion, his faith. She'd worn their marriage like a second skin, comfortable, familiar, safe, until that one night. It was early November, nearly a year before the pregnancy. Daniel had left for a 3-day men's retreat with the church, a trip filled with bonfires, devotionals, and sermons about purity and perseverance. Grace stayed behind, her evenings stretching long and quiet in their yellow kitchen. She hadn't been expecting company when the doorbell rang after sunset. Standing there was Caleb Rivers, the new third-grade teacher at Ashford Elementary. Tall, warm-eyed, with a smile that could thaw the frost from January windows. He was holding a paper bag in one hand and a bottle of red wine in the other. "Brought too much Thai food," he said, grinning. "Figured you could help me out." She almost said no. Almost. But loneliness has a way of reshaping a decision in seconds. And Caleb had been easy to talk to from the start. They'd worked late together a few times on lesson plans. He'd helped her relabel cubbies in her classroom. They'd exchanged late-night emails about how to get little Jordan M. to stop biting his classmates. They'd laughed. She'd felt light again, in a way she hadn't for a long time. That night, over steaming cartons and glasses of wine, the conversation dipped into more personal waters, her frustration with the endless cycle of fertility treatments, his struggle adjusting to a small town that seemed allergic to change. She didn't remember the moment the space between them closed. Only that 1 minute she was laughing, and the next she was kissing him like she'd been holding her breath for years. It was one night, one mistake, and the next morning, Grace drove to church early, knelt at the altar, and cried until her makeup ran down her face. She told herself it had been nothing, a lapse in judgment, a crack in the wall she'd immediately sealed shut. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't tell Hannah, her sister. She didn't tell anyone. The months passed, and she convinced herself it had been buried. Until the day she missed her period. She took the test alone in the bathroom, the world slowing to a crawl as 2 pink lines bloomed in the tiny window. For a moment, joy bubbled up, then the memory hit. That night. Caleb. The timing. No, it couldn't be. She prayed harder than she ever had before. "Please, God. Please let this be Daniel's child. Please." Please let him never have to know. She bargained. She promised to be the best wife, the most faithful wife, if only the baby would come out pale-skinned, blue-eyed, unmistakably Daniel's. She kept her fear locked away, but the journal under her mattress began to fill. November 14th. I made a mistake. A terrible one. I only wanted to feel wanted. Nathan hasn't touched me in weeks. He prays harder, but he's drifting away. And then Caleb. God, what have I done? January 3rd. Missed my period. I'm terrified. Please let it be Daniel's. I'll never stray again. I swear. February 9th. It can't be his. It can't. Please, God, let it not be his. I will do everything right from now on. Every ultrasound, every flutter of movement inside her came with a silent plea. Let him look like Daniel. Let this nightmare dissolve when I see his face. And yet, in her quietest moments, she caught Daniel watching her belly with a strange expression, something unreadable, but heavy. She told herself he was just worried, protective. She clung to that belief like a lifeline, because the alternative was unthinkable. The months rolled on. The nursery was painted, the crib assembled. Daniel rubbed her feet at night. They posed for pictures at the baby shower, his hand steady on her stomach. Grace tried to believe. She tried so hard. But every time she looked in the mirror, she thought about what might be growing inside her. Not just a child, but the truth. The truth she prayed would never come out. The truth that would, in the span of minutes, turn a delivery room into a crime scene. The first snow of the season fell the morning Grace went into labor. Big, lazy flakes that drifted down from a sky the color of tin, settling on the windshield of Daniel's old pickup truck as he pulled it around to the front of the house. She was 39 weeks, just shy of her due date, when the contractions began, low and steady like the tightening of a fist deep inside her. The doctor at St. Mary's said it was time. The drive was quiet. Too quiet. Grace sat in the passenger seat, gripping the edge of the seatbelt as the truck rumbled over the winding back roads. Daniel's hand stayed at 10 and 2. He didn't turn on the radio. Didn't try to comfort her. When the nurse at the check-in desk asked if he was nervous, he said, "I'll have my answer soon enough." Grace frowned. "Answer to what?" she asked. He didn't reply. The delivery room, room 308, was bright and sterile, the air humming faintly with the sound of machines. Nurses moved like a well-rehearsed dance, checking monitors, laying out instruments. Grace focused on her breathing, on the rhythm that would carry her through this final stretch. Hours passed in waves of pain and relief. Daniel stayed near the wall, arms folded, eyes never leaving her face. Every time she looked at him, his gaze felt different. Not anxious, not excited, just fixed. At 3:47 p.m., it happened. A cry split the air, loud, healthy, fierce. The nurse lifted the baby, small and wriggling, and began to wipe him clean. Grace's heart swelled so fast it hurt. And then silence. The nurse froze for half a beat. Her eyes flickered, just enough for Grace to notice. She placed the baby in Grace's arms, and in that instant, the world shifted. His skin was brown. Warm, deep brown, not pale like hers, not ruddy like Daniel's. His hair was dark and tightly curled. His nose, his lips, beautiful, perfect, and unmistakable. Grace's arms trembled. Her breath hitched. The joy that had been rushing through her seconds ago froze solid. She didn't dare look at Daniel, but she felt him, felt the air change. When she finally turned her head, he wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He was confirmed. It was the look of a man who'd been waiting for this moment all along. He didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't slam his fists against the wall like in some movie scene. He just turned, walked out of the room, and closed the door behind him with a soft click. Grace's pulse thundered in her ears. The baby shifted in her arms, his tiny fingers curling into her gown. She wanted to hold him closer, but her body felt locked in place. The nurse hovered. "Do you want me to take him to the nursery for a bit?" Grace nodded slowly. Her voice wouldn't work. As the bassinet rolled away, her vision blurred. She wanted to call Daniel back, to beg him to listen, to explain. But what could she say? It was one night. It meant nothing. "I still love you." Would that matter? Minutes ticked by, 5, 10, 15. No sign of him. She told herself he'd gone outside to breathe. Maybe call a friend. Maybe pray. Her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion settling in from the labor. She began to drift into that hazy space between sleep and waking. Then, Footsteps. Firm. Heavy. Purposeful. The door opened. Daniel stood there, his face pale, his eyes sharp. His hands were clenched into fists. "Daniel," she began, but he raised a hand and she stopped. "You knew this baby wasn't mine," he said, his voice steady, almost quiet. Tears burned her eyes. "I was going to tell you." "You knew for months," he interrupted. "I was scared. I thought maybe it wouldn't show." He let out a dry laugh that sent a chill down her spine. "Didn't show, huh?" "Please," she whispered. "I never wanted to replace you. I still love you. Don't let hate win. Not now." For just a second, something flickered in his eyes. Pain, confusion, but it vanished as quickly as it came. He turned and left the room again. Grace sagged back against the pillows, sobbing silently. She didn't know it yet, but that was the last time she would speak to her husband. Because 7 minutes later, he would return, not as a husband, not as a father, but as a man who had decided the truth deserved blood. Room 308 was quiet except for the soft hum of the air vent and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Grace lay back against the pillows, eyes half closed, body limp from the strain of labor and the heaviness of what had just happened. She thought maybe he'd gone for good. Maybe Daniel needed time, space, anything to cool the storm she saw in his eyes. But Daniel hadn't gone home. In another part of the maternity ward, security cameras caught him standing in front of a supply closet. For 3 long minutes, he didn't move. His fingers tapped slowly against his thigh, his gaze fixed on nothing. Then, like a switch had been flipped, he reached up, took one of the thick, coiled medical cords from a stainless steel hook, and turned toward the hallway. He walked past 2 nurses, nodded at one. No one stopped him. He was a husband, a new father. No one knew. The door to room 308 creaked open. Grace turned her head, relief breaking through her fear, until she saw what was in his hand. A 4-foot length of heavy, flexible tubing. Her voice caught. "Daniel, what are you doing?" He didn't answer. He just walked toward her in slow, measured steps, the way a butcher walks when the animal has stopped struggling. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can fix this. We can still. I gave you everything," he murmured, his tone eerily calm. "And you made me a fool. In front of the whole damn town." Her eyes filled with tears. "He's just a baby, Daniel. He didn't ask for this." "But I did," he said, his voice hardening. "I asked for my child." He moved so quickly she barely had time to scream. The tubing looped around her neck in a swift, practiced motion. Grace thrashed, her legs kicking under the thin hospital blanket. Her hands clawed at his arms, her fingernails digging deep into his skin. She tried to say his name, but the words caught in her throat, trapped by the crushing pressure. The monitor beside her began to beep erratically, sharp, frantic alarms. Down the hall, Nurse April Lawson heard the sound. At first, she thought it might be a panic attack, common after childbirth. But then she heard something else, a muffled, desperate scream. She ran. Throwing open the door, she froze for half a second, just long enough for the image to burn itself into her memory forever. Grace's face was turning blue. Daniel was straddling her on the bed, his fists locked around the tubing, pulling with cold, mechanical precision. The blanket twisted around them like a shroud. "Sir, stop. Get off her," April shouted, her voice sharp with command. Daniel didn't even look at her. His eyes were glassy, locked on Grace's, as if he were watching the light go out on purpose. April lunged for the emergency button on the wall. A harsh buzzer blared across the maternity ward. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. 2 orderlies and a security guard burst in. One tackled Daniel to the floor, wrenching the tubing from his hands. The other tried to lift Grace into a sitting position, starting CPR immediately. "Come on, Grace, stay with me, stay with me." April's voice broke as she tilted Grace's head back, checking for breath. But Grace's arms were slack. Her lips were pale. Her eyes, open, stared at nothing. The defibrillator pads went on. The machine charged. A shock jolted her body, once, twice. Nothing. At 4:38 p.m., less than 52 minutes after giving birth to her first child, Grace Whitmore was pronounced dead. The ward erupted in chaos. Security cuffed Daniel's wrists behind his back. He didn't resist, didn't say a word. As they marched him past the nurse's station, one staff member shouted, "You're a monster." He didn't even blink. The rest of the maternity floor was locked down. Visitors were ushered out. Babies were wheeled into secured rooms. And somewhere, in a bassinet just down the hall, a newborn slept, motherless now, while the sound of his mother's death still echoed in the walls. The news hit Ashford, Vermont like a thunderclap. By nightfall, the story had already torn through the town faster than the snowstorm moving in from the mountains. On the evening news, the headline was blunt and merciless. White husband murders wife after interracial affair exposed in delivery room. At first, people didn't believe it. Not Daniel and Grace Whitmore. Not the couple everyone thought would be together until the rocking chair years. But by the time the sheriff's office released his mugshot, orange jumpsuit, blank stare, there was no denying it. The shock hardened into something else. Half the town spoke Grace's name in hushed tones, voices trembling with grief and disbelief. She was so kind, always smiling, she didn't deserve this. They left flowers and candles outside the Whitmore house, their flames flickering in the icy wind. The other half? They whispered about sin, about betrayal. She lied to him, some said. What did she expect? Those words cut deepest for Hannah Brooks, Grace's younger sister. She'd been at home when the police knocked on her door, their faces grim, their voices careful. At first, the words didn't make sense. Dead, murdered, the baby survived. Then the floor just fell out from under her. She made it to St. Mary's within the hour. The maternity ward was locked down, buzzing with trauma. A nurse, April Lawson, the one who'd tried to save Grace, brought her to a small, quiet room. And there, in a plastic hospital bassinet, lay the child who had changed everything. Tiny, peaceful, wrapped in a blue and white blanket. He didn't have a name yet, so the hospital ID tag just read, Baby Boy Whitmore. Hannah's throat tightened. She reached down, lifting him into her arms. He stirred, yawned, and made a small, sighing sound before settling against her chest. She pressed her lips to the crown of his head, breathing in that warm, sweet newborn scent. He's mine now, she whispered, though no one had asked the question. By morning, national media vans were parked outside the courthouse. Satellite dishes sprouted like weeds on the frozen sidewalks. Reporters jostled for position, barking into cameras about murder in the maternity ward and a shocking intersection of race, betrayal, and domestic violence. Twitter exploded. Cable talk shows debated whether it was an honor killing or a hate crime. Activists condemned the murder as a racially charged execution. Pockets of extremists online praised Daniel for protecting his legacy. And in Ashford, the division took root. At the grocery store, someone slipped Hannah a folded note that said, "Praying for you and the baby." At the post office the next day, another note landed in her coat pocket. "Don't raise a lie like it's truth." She ignored them both. But what she couldn't ignore was the way people's eyes followed her, the way conversations went quiet when she walked into a room. At Grace's funeral, the church was packed. Pastor Everett Cole stood at the pulpit, his voice trembling as he called for compassion, for understanding. Grace was not perfect, he said, but she was kind. And no one, deserves to die for their mistakes. A few people walked out before he finished. Hannah stayed in the front pew, Elijah in her arms. Yes, she'd chosen his name now, staring at the white casket draped in lilies. She could still see her sister's face in her mind. Not the peaceful kind you hope for in death, but the last image Nurse Lawson had described. Eyes wide open, mouth half-parted, as if her final word had been trapped in her throat. The Whitmore house on Pine Street became a monument no one wanted to visit. Its shutters stayed closed. The lawn went uncut. Neighbors crossed the street rather than walk past. Hannah refused to leave Ashford. She moved into her sister's house with Elijah, filling the empty rooms with the sound of lullabies and the rustle of baby clothes. Some nights, when the wind howled and the house seemed too big for her and the baby, she'd sit in the nursery, yellow walls, paper stars still dangling overhead, and rock him in the chair Grace had painted. She'd tell him stories about the mother he'd never remember, but who had loved him fiercely, even in her worst mistakes. Because that was the truth no one could take from him. Detective Sarah Jensen was still in her coat when the call came through. Homicide at St. Mary's maternity ward. For a moment, she thought she'd misheard. Maternity wards were places for life, not death. By the time she arrived, the scene was sealed. The bright, warm corridors of the hospital had been turned cold by police tape and murmured instructions. Nurses stood in clusters, their faces pale, their eyes red-rimmed. Room 308 was silent now, save for the low hum of equipment. The bed where Grace had died was stripped bare, the sheets already bagged and tagged as evidence. In the corner, Detective Jensen saw the coiled medical tubing, sealed inside a plastic evidence bag. She knew, just from looking at it, that it had been pulled tight with purpose. The first witness she spoke to was Nurse April Lawson, still in her scrubs, still trembling. April recounted every second, the beeping monitor, the scream, the sight of Daniel Whitmore straddling his wife with the cord in his hands. "What did you see in his eyes?" Jensen asked. April didn't hesitate. "Decision," she said. It wasn't panic. It wasn't confusion. It was done. Over the next 48 hours, Jensen began piecing together the truth. She searched the Whitmore home on Pine Street. Upstairs, the nursery was painted pale yellow, the crib brand new, the shelves stocked with tiny clothes still folded from the baby shower. But in the bedroom, on Daniel's nightstand, she found 3 different devotional books, each with the same passage highlighted. The sins of the wife shall not be covered by the righteousness of her husband. Under Grace's side of the mattress, she discovered the spiral notebook. Grace's handwriting started out neat and hopeful, pages about fertility diets, prayer lists, and faith. But then, 9 months earlier, the tone shifted. November 14th, I made a mistake. A terrible one. I only wanted to feel wanted. God, what have I done? January 3rd, missed my period. Please, God, let it be Daniel's. The entries grew frantic, then resigned. The last one before her death read, "If I die in childbirth, tell him I was scared but ready." Jensen also pulled Daniel's financial records. 3 months before the birth, he'd paid cash to a private investigator in Montpelier. When questioned, the PI admitted Daniel had hired him to watch Grace while he was out of town. The investigator never caught her with another man after the suspected affair, but he did take photos of Grace and Caleb Rivers, a fellow teacher, walking out of the school late one evening, laughing together. They didn't look romantic, the PI said, but he looked at those photos like someone had stabbed him in the gut. It was time to talk to Caleb. Jensen found him in Hartford, Connecticut, where he'd moved 6 months earlier. When she told him Grace was dead, his hands shook. No, 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 he kept saying. He admitted to a one-night affair with her nearly a year ago, during a lonely night when Daniel had been away. It was stupid. It was wrong. But I never forced her, and I didn't even know she was pregnant. Then Jensen told him about the baby. Caleb froze. "That's my son," he whispered. She nodded. His voice broke. "I didn't even know he existed until this minute. And now he's got no mother." Blood samples confirmed it. Caleb was the biological father. That detail was sealed from public records, but for Jensen and the prosecution, it painted the picture clearly. This wasn't a man blindsided in the delivery room. Daniel had known. He had suspected for months, watched Grace's belly grow, smiled for photos, rubbed her feet, and waited for the moment of truth. Jensen found the most damning evidence in Daniel's text history. 5 days before the birth, he'd messaged his brother. "If it's not mine, I don't know what I'll do. But I won't raise another man's legacy." And then there were the anonymous forum posts under the username, Restoring Order VT. If you can't trust your wife's womb, you don't have a wife. You have a betrayal in address. If my wife ever brought home a baby that wasn't mine, she wouldn't live to regret it. That's not hate. That's honor. By the end of the week, Jensen had built a timeline that left no room for doubt. Premeditation, the PI, the highlighted scripture, the threatening forum posts. Motive, obsession with bloodline and legacy, fueled by suspected infidelity. Execution, a calm walk to the supply closet, retrieving the cord, and returning to kill a woman still bleeding from childbirth. To the outside world, it was a shocking act of rage. To Detective Sarah Jensen, it was cold, deliberate murder. The trial of Daniel Whitmore began on a rainy Monday in October. Outside the courthouse, umbrellas bobbed in the cold drizzle while news crews jostled for position. Protesters lined both sides of the street. One group carrying signs that read "Justice for Grace" and "Black Lives Begin at Birth," the other with hand-painted boards declaring he snapped, "You would too, and protect fathers, not infidelity." Inside, the air was thick with the kind of tension that makes people whisper even when there's no rule saying they can't speak. Daniel entered wearing a beige prison jumpsuit. He didn't glance toward the gallery, didn't look at Hannah Brooks, who sat in the front row holding baby Elijah in her lap. His beard was flecked with gray now, his eyes sunken, but his posture was straight, almost rigid, like a man determined not to give an inch. Opening salvos. The defense opened first. Daniel's attorney, David Lame, told the jury this was not the story the media had twisted. It was about a man blindsided by betrayal at the most vulnerable moment of his life. Lame claimed Daniel had suffered a psychological break, emotional duress, he called it, triggered by the sudden realization that the baby wasn't his. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Valeria Torres, didn't waste time. She told the jury this was not a man who snapped, it was a man who planned. He didn't lose control, she said. He took it. She promised the jury they'd see the evidence. The private investigator, the highlighted Bible passages, the anonymous forum posts. The prosecution's case. Their star witness was Nurse April Lawson. When I walked in, she said, her voice trembling. He was still on top of her. She wasn't moving anymore. Her eyes, they were open. The defense cross-examined gently, trying to suggest maybe Daniel hadn't known what he was doing. Could he have been in a dissociative state? April didn't blink. I've worked trauma cases. Panic attacks. Postpartum psychosis. What I saw wasn't confusion, it was decision. Detective Sarah Jensen followed, walking the jury through every piece of the investigation. The journal entries, the PI's testimony, the text to Daniel's brother, and the forum posts. She paused on the one dated 3 weeks before the due date. If you can't trust your wife's womb, you don't have a wife. You have a betrayal in a dress. The room went still. The digital trail. Torres projected Daniel's text message to his brother on the screen in bold letters. If it's not mine, I don't know what I'll do. But I won't raise another man's legacy. She let it hang there for a moment before turning back to the jury. That's not the voice of a man waiting to forgive, she said. That's the voice of a man waiting to strike. The defense fights back. When it was their turn, the defense called psychiatrist Dr. Alan Keene, who diagnosed Daniel with acute stress disorder triggered by unexpected paternity shock. For someone like Daniel, Keene explained, raised in a home where fatherhood and bloodline were sacred, this was not just infidelity, it was an existential rupture. On cross-examination, Torres asked one question. Would a man in a dissociative episode calmly walk down a hallway, select a medical instrument, and carry out a killing in silence? Keene hesitated. It's possible, he said slowly, but unlikely. The brother's testimony. Daniel's brother took the stand, describing a childhood where their father preached purity and legacy every Sunday morning and beat it into us every Saturday night. He insisted Daniel had been broken by Grace's betrayal. Torres turned his words back on him. Did your brother ever say what he'd do if Grace cheated? A pause. Yes. He said he'd never raise another man's child. And if she ever did that to him, she'd regret it. Hannah Brooks. Finally, it was Hannah's turn. She carried Elijah with her to the witness stand, holding him in her lap as she faced the man who had killed her sister. I didn't know about the affair, she said plainly. Grace didn't tell anyone. She thought she could survive the truth if she just held on long enough. Torres leaned forward. And what happened when the truth came out? Hannah's eyes locked on Daniel. He killed her before she even got to hold her baby a second time. Closing arguments. On the final day, Torres stood before the jury with a photograph of Grace, smiling, pregnant, unaware. This case isn't about paternity, she said. It's not about betrayal. It's about control. Daniel Whitmore believed that if his wife defied him, if she carried a child that didn't bear his blood, her life was no longer worth sparing. That is not honor. That is murder. The defense made one last plea, calling Daniel a man pushed past his limits and driven to madness by humiliation. But the jurors had seen too much. The verdict. They deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreperson's voice was steady. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Thomas Whitmore, guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel didn't flinch. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And then, just as the gavel fell, a baby's cry echoed through the gallery. Elijah's cry. The room froze. For one surreal moment, it felt like the verdict had come from him. Hannah lifted the boy, whispered something only he could hear, and walked out into the rain without looking back. The day after the verdict, snow blanketed Ashford in a soft, unbroken sheet of white. For a brief moment, the town looked peaceful again, its divisions hidden, its scars disguised. But under the snow, nothing had changed. Grace Whitmore was still gone. Daniel was locked away, unrepentant. And a boy who had not yet learned to walk was already carrying the weight of a tragedy he did not choose. Grace's Law. In the months that followed, Vermont quietly passed new legislation. Panic buttons in every postpartum hospital room, designed to summon immediate help in emergencies. No press conference, no parade of politicians, just a signed bill and a promise whispered through the corridors of the State House. What happened in room 308 will never happen again. The nurses at St. Mary's called it Grace's Law. Hannah and Elijah. Hannah Brooks settled into the house on Pine Street, determined to raise Elijah where his mother had dreamed of raising him. She filled the rooms with warmth, homemade soups simmering on the stove, lullabies drifting down the hallway, the sound of little feet learning to walk. Some days were harder than others. At the grocery store, she still caught whispers when she passed. At the post office, she once overheard someone mutter, "That baby's a reminder of everything wrong with the world." She turned and answered without hesitation, "No, he's a reminder of what happens when people think some lives matter less than others." Caleb Rivers. In the spring, Hannah reached out to Caleb Rivers. They spoke on the phone first, long, careful conversations about Elijah's future. Caleb visited once a month, never pushing, never demanding. At first, Elijah cried when he held him. But by the third visit, the boy reached for Caleb's beard and giggled. One afternoon, Elijah fell asleep on his father's chest, tiny fingers curled in the fabric of his shirt. Caleb sat there for a long time, his eyes wet, his hand on the back of his son's head. "He's got her smile," he whispered, keeping Grace alive. Hannah began collecting pieces of Grace's life, photos from her phone, letters she'd written but never sent, the yellow and blue baby blanket she'd crocheted during her pregnancy. She kept them in a wooden chest in the nursery. "For when he's old enough to ask," she told herself. On Elijah's first birthday, there was no big party. Just Hannah, Caleb, a cupcake with a single candle, and a framed picture of Grace on the mantel. Hannah held Elijah in her lap, whispering, "You were so wanted, little man. You are still wanted." The 308 Project. That summer, Hannah started a nonprofit called the 308 Project, named after the hospital room where her sister's life ended. Its mission, to support women trapped in abusive relationships, especially those tangled in the intersection of race, religion, and reproductive trauma. The first scholarship went to a young biracial woman training to be a doula. Every birth, Hannah said at the small award ceremony, should begin in safety, and every mother should leave the hospital alive. The visit. When Elijah turned 2, Hannah took him to visit Grace's grave for the first time. It was a bright morning, the grass still damp with dew. Elijah wore a blue button-up shirt, his curls wild from the wind. He clutched a fistful of daisies. They stood there for a long time. Hannah knelt beside him and whispered, "This is your mama." The boy looked at the stone for a moment, then toddled forward and placed the flowers at its base. He didn't cry, he didn't understand. But somewhere deep inside, he seemed to know this place mattered. What remains? Ashford never fully healed. Some people left. Some stayed, but kept their distance from old friends. The church never spoke Grace's name from the pulpit again, but Hannah whispered it every night before bed. Elijah grew, loved and protected, into a child who laughed easily and danced when music played. And sometimes, when the paper star mobile in the nursery turned in the breeze, Hannah swore she could hear her sister's voice, soft, steady, unbroken. Because in the end, Grace Whitmore's story was not just about the day she died. It was about the life she left behind, the child who carries her light, and the people who refuse to let that light be extinguished. And that was something no one, not even Daniel Whitmore, could ever take away.